The seats were firm. Not the pleasant airport pillow firm either, but the kind where you find yourself readjusting every few minutes to prevent pins and needles. The fuzzy feeling, as my 6-year-old Ellie likes to call it. Still, I suppose they're not going to be nice seats, considering the context of their use. Maybe after Amy finishes up on justifying why she's lost out on another red chip, I complete my case for memory foam. Still, with 25 minutes left, I decided to switch my focus away from the seats to those in them. 4 chairs seated the regular misfits, but one remained empty. In a swift process of elimination, I deduced that it was Joan missing. This was entirely out of character. You see, Joan reveled in the boastful opportunities each Thursday presented itself with. One person's trip up was, inevitably, another glory story for her. Unwilling to listen to any more anecdotes, I excused myself for a fag break. Upon reaching into my pockets, I felt my keys, pocket knife, coppers and cash. No cigarettes. Shit. I gestured a 2-finger motion over to Harry, which triggered a move into his own pocket, whereby he pulled out a crumpled pack of sterling jewel and tossed them over. Harry was my saving grace here. He was short and had shaggy dark hair, coloured with more streaks of grey than he cares to admit. When he wasn't mooming over the food pantry manager, Georgia, we spoke pretty frequently before sessions and after. Georgia would come in during sessions to restock the tea bags, coffee, snacks, etc., as she, among many others here, think that the best way to help us delve into our most regrettable moments is with a cup of tea and a bourbon biscuit. Harry frequently asked me for advice on how to approach women as a recovering alcoholic, something I'd do for very few, including him. We share a familiar sense of regret concerning our pasts, Harry and I, and it's surprising how strongly that can bond a pair. So I caught the sterling pack, left the hall, and exited towards the front. As I stood outside, the September breeze teased my freshly lit cigarette, so I walked around the back of the building towards the car park, where I would be better sheltered. But something wasn't right. Just to my left, vaguely lit underneath a street lamp, was a small, blue Skoda. It was Joan's car. This didn't make sense. In an effort to gain some, I walked towards it. My steps rapid in pace. As I approached the vehicle, a sense of dread began to brew within me. As I got closer, the fear of the unknown became overwhelming. But I remained on course and reached the passenger door. I knelt in line with the window and peered inside. There was something in the back, so I shifted myself to get a better view. I pulled on the door handle, opening the door. And there, laying limp and distorted, was Joan. Her neck was raw with vertical claw marks and her eyes open. Neither feature was accompanied with a rising chest, so it was clear to assume that she was dead. This realization struck me still, before I started to hyperventilate. The quicker my diaphragm rose and fell, the sharper my breaths became. The lack of oxygen to my lungs made my legs quiver, and I fell. But I didn't hit the concrete. My torso was swiftly caught by a pair of fair-skinned arms before I was hoisted against the car body, whereby I could regain footing. It was Georgia. You need to breathe for me, alright? Keep focused on me and breathe, she said. Georgia mimicked this behavior, and I followed for enough minutes to regain control of my lungs, where I explained what I had seen. Trembling from the panic attack aftershock, Georgia sat me on the entrance steps while she rung for the police and the ambulance. Alarmed by the sudden sound of sirens, the rest of the group came outside, only to be dazed by blue and met with the universally alarming strips of black and yellow. Having just gotten over the shock myself, the last thing I needed was to hear the piercing cries of Amy and erratically formed questions from the rest. Having become numb to the situation herself, Georgia and I decided to leave. I made my way towards the bus stop before she stopped me again and insisted she drive me home herself. You mustn't go home like this. Not on your own. Please, let me drive you. I didn't want to go home. I wanted to go to a bar. Any bar. No amount of fucking sobriety chips was worth sitting idly, as my brain replayed that sight in the car. I was fiercely desperate for liquid relief. So I needed a distraction, and George's company would at least do that. So I accepted. It was a few minutes into the drive when I first noticed scratches on George's forearms. Fresh ones. So I inquired, and she told me that she'd recently got a kitten, and it was overly playful. Having no reason to question this, I felt her answer a satisfiable one, so returned my gaze to the dimly lit streets in front, decorated with glimpses of a silver crucifix that hung from the rear-view mirror. It wasn't until we passed over several speed bumps where my attention shifted from streets to sounds. The sound of clinking behind me. Immediately fixed on this all too familiar sound, I looked around to have my assumptions confirmed. In the back of the car was a box full of spirits. I'm talking the hard stuff. Bacardi, Smirnoff, pretty much everything good. Euphoria was an arm's reach away. Oh, don't mind those. They're for a get-together this week, she remarked. Unbeknown to Georgia, this had sent a wave of anxiety through me. Upon this realization, Joan's image remained glued in my mind. Every attempt at a distraction was interrupted by images of her caved-in chest and peeled neck. My distress became noticeable to Georgia, and she offered me a Xanax. In dire need of chemical soothing, I took it and immediately felt alleviated. To try and prolong my pacified mind, I shut my eyes. Now, I don't know how long I was out for, and I don't know how Georgia managed to get me inside my flat. But what I do know is that wasn't Xanax. I couldn't move. The only movement I felt was internal pressure, attempting to will my body into motion. I analysed every aspect of my surroundings in the line of vision I was granted, but nothing was out of the ordinary. My breathing began to quicken, which triggered movement. Steps were made against the lino flooring, and into plain sight stepped Georgia. She entered, clasping a small bottle of Bacardi. With some already drunk, she swigged from it again before closing the proximity between us both. She was so close now that her breath screamed with an all too familiar scent. This jarred me, It was clear from the look of her eyes that she had malicious intentions this night. God help me. She stood again and reached for a bedazzled picture frame on the cabinet. There shot a wave of anguish in me, as George's attention was now on a photograph of my daughter. You see, I had one. Once. Her gaze remained on the image. The subject of this, Georgia began to emphasize with a pointed finger, before meeting my eyes again. Shall I show you mine? She remarked. She shot her glance from Ellie in the picture to a worn and faded image pulled from her back pocket. She met my eyes once more, approached my currently paralyzed body, and angled the image in plain sight. I looked up. Dread plunged into my gut. Pretty, isn't she? Of course, she wasn't so pretty after 4 broken hip bones, a fractured forearm, blunt head trauma, 4 cracked ribs, and 1 shattered jaw. My heart dropped. It did so, because this was not the first time I had seen the girl in the picture, nor the first I was hearing of her injuries. 11 years on, and I can recall those details as clear as the day the prosecution told them. Georgia kept silent. She wore a look like I had never seen before. Seconds passed before all emotion ran from Georgia's expression. She appeared vacant and derelict, unable to express any sincerities of my own, any ownership or remorse. I watched desolately as she swigged the rum once more and pulled up her sleeves. This exposed a field of scars across her. She reached once more for the frame on the countertop and smashed it against the wall. Shards now scattered across the printed flooring. She bent to retrieve the piece most prominent, and as her eyes locked on mine, daring me not to look, a strip of red appeared across her wrist, vibrant in color, a trail of blood dripping down to her fingers. I do this to remind myself there is life still in me. As you can imagine, the loss of a child can make you forget. I ached with emotion. As hers flowed ruby, mine did remorse, regret, sorrow, fear, everything. This had what she had been waiting for, I suppose. I never divulged details of why I joined AA in the sessions, meaning that Georgia, on her stop-ins, would have no way of knowing that I killed a little girl drunk driving. No way of knowing unless this. She mothered that child and ruthlessly mourned her since that day. She never forgot the faces of the 2 women that took the joy out of her life. It seemed she already got Joan. Georgia exited the lounge and returned upon her retrieving instruments. I was helpless, still, with the city that neighbored, sleeping and lights lowly lit. Georgia needed to wait no more. She stepped towards me, slowly, taunting me. She traced over my jawbone with the jagged knife she held. After minutes of teasing me with my final moments, she lowered her lips to my ears and simply uttered, "You reap what you sow." Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.